When riots flared in these Brixton streets in the summer of 1980, there were many who were astonished and horrified. But for some, black and white, what happened here and in other British cities was part of an experience which started a long time ago. An experience which for many people living here today began in the 1940s, when they first came to help the mother country.
London is the place for me. London, this lovely city. You can go to France or America, India, Asia or Australia, but you must come back to London City.
During the war, thousands of colored people volunteered to help us, men and women. We needed them in those days. They were our comrades in the forces and in industry. We welcomed them all. They were all part of one family, or so they thought. When the war was over, they weren't so sure.
Well, I volunteered for service with the Air Force ground crews when they started recruiting in the West Indies. The first lot of Barbadians who came over in '44, and Marjorie came.
I came then in late '44.
Yes.
The same reason, they were recruiting, so.
The ATS, so.
Bit of adventure, I suppose. Yeah. And, I was in the ATS, did clerical work. There was no means of getting out of the island, so to speak. Everything had stopped. So this was an opportunity.
Well, you were teaching then, weren't you?
Yeah, I was teaching, yes. And I thought, well, this would be an opportunity to come out and see a bit more of the world.
But of course, people didn't just travel for the sake of it, because this is obviously unnecessary and unwise. But to identify with the war effort was noble, as well as very practical and useful, and it was sort of mutual. You know, they could help somebody as well as helping themselves. This was a very natural thing to do.
Things we found strange were people staring, girls, they would stare at us and so on. We found it strange. And I suppose as a protection we kept together, you see. And,
Did you actually meet any hostility or not?
Not really. Yeah, not really. I think people had strange ideas. Why did we have a shower every day when, they didn't? Things like that. But when we went out, we were together, people just looked. We often went. If we were off camp, we would go visiting places and so on. People just looked. And I think it was after the war, after we were out of uniform, that we, girls, began to notice and feel that we were different. People, they looked at you twice and sneered for no apparent reason. I think that was one reason why a lot of people kept together, a lot of West Indians kept together. If you went to buy anything, you were passed by. At first it wasn't, you didn't really take any notice, but sometimes you would have been there, 2 or 3 people at a counter, for instance. And people would not, the assistant would not see me, would bypass and go to someone else to ask. And sometimes you would stand there for ages and either get frustrated and walk out, or you get annoyed and you shout, what's the matter with me, something like that. But that kind of thing.
How did you feel about that sort of thing?
Oh, it was terrible. It was terrible. Very often you avoided that particular shop. Next time you might walk miles to get the same, the thing you wanted, rather than go to that place again.
midnight on Tuesday, August the 14th, 1945. Before the Prime Minister had finished his radio announcement that Japan had surrendered, London went wild, literally, absolutely, crazily wild. At one celebrated pub, Charlie Brown's in Limehouse, all the nations rejoiced that for the first time in 14 years, the whole world is at peace. The war of 1939-45 is over. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow, where even the bonfires may be prefabricated, the long continuity of a nation. Peace night begins a new and glorious future.
When the war finished, things slipped back to the old shipshod manner again. Men have been thrown off the pool. Coloured boys have gone for jobs, have been refused on account of their colour. Even myself, I've gone for jobs and been refused by government agencies and private owners.
I have a sneaky feeling that in those early years after the war, the people who had wasted their lives, destroying this menace and trying to get their normal lives, recover their normal lives, would have been shod quite easily of racial animosity, provided the press in the first place had been helpful, hadn't been dangerous. And
what about the government?
That didn't happen. They didn't get a lot of help from any source, and people were left to resolve these things. And of course, the mischief makers got busy. They got busy. They were very, very busy. Besides, there were shortages. Housing, food, clothing, things were on rations. We still got our ration books. And people were in competition.
Do you think the government could have done more?
Oh, certainly. Especially a Labour government, with the way the Labour government were voted into power in 1945 was an indication that the population of Britain, wanted to see something better than they had found themselves with in 1939.
The Labour Party's great victory shows that the country is ready for a new policy to face new world conditions. Never before have the electors shown clearly their desire that there should be in this country a Labour government carrying out Labour's full policy. I am certain that this election has been one in which the electors have thought deeply on the fundamental questions of the future. And they realize that Labour is the party of the future and that Labour's policy is the only policy that can lead us to peace abroad and social justice at home.
I saw the attitudes change. I saw those attitudes change. And I often remember that and think, well, how is it possible in a short time for people to change like that? Because those men who were going to fight among themselves to provide me with a bed on one night were still alive. There were people in their middle to young years, not old people, and they would have been around, and I saw people like them change, and in some cases deliberately go to the extent, they defile themselves really to lead people out of their ways. And this, I thought, was quite un-British. This was foreign, this was alien, this was wrong, but it developed.
Racially mixed communities had become established in some seaports long before the war. Cardiff's Tiger Bay was one of these. As early as 1940, the area had been studied by a social scientist, Kenneth Little, whose book, Negroes in Britain, was based on this research. Although motivated by an academic interest, Little did not remain unmoved by his findings.
I was also increasingly motivated by concern for these people They and other non-Europeans whom I've met seem to me to be the object of discrimination, and I had opportunities of observing this through the experience of my undergraduate West African and West Indian friends, and I became more and more indignant over that aspect of the matter. I think it's true to say that there was discrimination both at the official and unofficial level, and that young coloured girls in particular had difficulty in obtaining jobs, difficulties which were not officially gendered, but the outcome of social attitudes.
Kenneth Little was only one of a very small number of people who were trying to alert public opinion about the existence of a colour bar in Britain. And they were talking about very tiny populations of coloured people, mainly in Tiger Bay and Cardiff, in the docklands of the Merseyside and to some extent in Manchester. So although there was an uneasy recognition that even in the mother country there was a colour bar, morally unacceptable, socially unjustifiable, at the same time there was a generalized recognition that when the war against fascism had come on our doorsteps, the subjects of the king, brown and black subjects, had taken part in that fight together. And there was a warmth of recognition of their contribution, which coexisted along with this awareness that, you know, we weren't treating them right.
The popular newspapers, the stories, the fictitious stories, the malicious, the wicked stories, which they published to sell newspapers during those early years after the war. Those stories have done, I think, incalculable harm to race relations.
Years ago in Britain, people could not meet a colored person upon the street. The English people were surprised to see an African or even a West Indian. It's not amazing again for anyone, since this great invasion is on. With all the happy climates they are displeased, they're making race from the colonies.
When you had serious journalists like Robert Key looking at the colour bar problem for Picture Post, the conclusion he came to, which was pretty widely shared, was that, regrettable as it was, there was not much you could do about changing people's hearts and minds. That was how it was seen. On the other hand, you couldn't ignore the fact that there were increasing racial incidents, racialist speeches, marches, meetings and the like, and a certain amount of street violence. And when cinema news reels reflected this, they too appeared to come to the conclusion, well, regrettable, but what can we do about it?
Of rowdies and political extremists. What happens when communist-led counter-demonstrators mass along the route of the projected Mosley March makes Britain wonder why the march was allowed to take place. Holding in check angry crowds, 400 police handle a tough job with restraint but firmly, arresting 34. Free public life comes to a standstill on a...
This view that came across in the public presentation of these issues and events, that nothing could be done about these facts, had the effect of reinforcing the inclination of politicians to duck for cover and not to do anything at all. It's a little-known fact, but an important fact nonetheless, that the opposition to the British Nationality Act of 1948 came from the Conservative Party. It was proposed by the Labour Party, but the Conservatives opposed it. And they opposed it for a very interesting and important reason. Their front-bench spokesman said in the House of Commons during the debate on that bill,
"We are proud in this country that we impose no colour bar restrictions on entry, but there would be no point in the new categories unless it is to drop the old idea of the common status and our proud boast of the open door."
Now, that is something which very few people know about. And the fact is that the Conservative Party had at that time a tradition of equal treatment, of fair treatment, which has largely been forgotten today. On the other side, the main opposition to coloured immigration in the 1940s came from the Labour Party and the trade unions, or at least from Labour members and trade unionists.
You must appreciate that the attitude of people in general, including members of the Labour Party, towards the so-called colour problem was, you might say, abysmal. And this was particularly marked in official circles. Time and time again, representatives of the West African Students' Union, WASU, of which you no doubt know, Dr. Moody or his colleagues, I myself would make this journey, this pilgrimage to the Colonial Office, very solemnly done, very solemnly received. We would make our recommendations, we would submit our memoranda, and in particular, I recall the occasion on which we drew attention to the fact that very many films made in the United States depicted black people, as we call them now, as coons. And we suggested that when this was repeatedly shown to a British audience, that it was likely to form British attitudes, to consolidate stereotypes. And we suggested even that a certain amount of censorship might be introduced. This was greeted with a certain amount of horror, this suggestion, by the senior member of the Colonial Office, who said somewhat indignantly, we couldn't possibly do that. These people are not British subjects. And that's as far as one got. But it is typical of the apathy, despite the fact that we tried to indicate to them the serious nature of the present situation. That if the British public were permitted to retain these extraordinary ideas of black people that they had, that sooner or later, with increasing immigration, there would be trouble. But this was utterly disregarded.
I think the fairest summary would be to say that on the part of policymakers and politicians, the fundamental view is there really isn't a problem. And the way in which it showed itself is that when Kenneth Little himself was asked by the Labour Party to advise them on what to do about the first arrival of immigrants from the Caribbean, he proposed an anti-Calabar bill, to which there was no response from the Labour Party and the Labour government at the time. When Reginald Sorensen, then a member of Parliament, proposed a private member's bill, the bill was allowed to be talked out in the House. So the advice that was given to the government at the time was virtually ignored.
Arrivals at Tilbury. The Empire Windrush brings to Britain 500 Jamaicans. Many are ex-servicemen who know England. They serve this country well. In Jamaica, they couldn't find work. Discouraged but full of hope, they sailed for Britain. Citizens of the British Empire coming to the mother country with good intent. Prodded by public opinion, the Colonial Office gives them a more cordial reception than was at first envisaged.
Well, as an ex-serviceman, I went home after spending 3.5 years here, and I've never had a square deal, so I've decided to come back to England with my wife and kid, where we get a better square deal. The weather here, I'm kind of used to it, so it won't make much difference to me. And I'm hoping that the best I will be able to get here where employment is concerned, as there is lot of unemployment back in my country.
Do remember, please, that the major influx was not the Empire Windrush. Less than 500 West Indians, former RAF men, came at that time. The major influx really started after 1952, and it started because of the McCarran-Walter Act in the United States, which stopped Caribbean immigration into America. And it was because of that principally that Caribbean migrants began to turn to the mother country instead of going to the land of hope and glory. We encountered massive labor shortages. And if you look at it, it is an interesting and important fact again that the rate of arrival of the West Indians from the Caribbean almost matched year by year, quarter by quarter, the level of labor vacancies in Britain. So that the two things were almost completely tied together. In short, they came because there were jobs for them to do here, and they came to do those jobs.
In 1954, about 10,000 West Indians came to Britain. In 1955, it is believed another 15,000 will make the long journey. Already their coming has caused a national controversy. But one point must always be borne in mind. Whatever our feelings, we cannot deny them entry. For all are British citizens and, as such, are entitled to the identical rights of any member of the Empire. Does the answer to these Britishers' problems lie in Britain or in the West Indies? And yet perhaps, if we dig deep enough, we may find the solution hidden within the conscience of us all.
It's one of the pieces of popular mythology which it is now almost impossible to dispose of, that coloured immigrants came to Britain from the West Indies or from India and Pakistan, utterly unprepared for what is now called the British way of life. The fact is that the Barbadian government in that time took enormous trouble to tell its emigrants to Britain more about the facts of life than anybody else thought fit to do at the time. And they produced a booklet in which they gave advice about housing conditions, about living conditions, even about the police. So that it simply isn't true that the sending governments did nothing about it. They did as much as one could reasonably expect of them to tell their citizens what they might expect in Britain. And the problem they encountered was that the people who were inviting them to come to Britain, London Transport, which was recruiting at the time in Barbados, textile mill owners in Lancashire and Yorkshire, who were putting advertisements into Indian and Pakistani newspapers. These people were saying to them, come to the land of plenty, jobs galore. But there was hardly any provision being made by the British government at the time. The result was that the newcomers were thrust back on their own resources. They took the advice of their own government, and they went where there was housing to be found by friends or relatives or whatever.
Sorry, no room. Pull up. Sorry, the last room gone. No more room. You have to try somewhere else. Sorry, we don't take any gifts here.
I'm an estate agent. If I had a house to let in a terrace, I should think twice about letting it to a coloured person. I don't know quite what the feeling would be amongst the other tenants.
Years ago in Britain, people could not meet a colored person upon the street. The English people was surprised to see an African or even a West Indian. It's not amazing again for anyone, since this great invasion is on. With all the happy climates they are displeased, they're making race from the colonies.
There is no colour bar in this city, no obstacle in the way of a man looking for lodgings. But there's enough colour prejudice to make it difficult for a West Indian to find a place in the ordinary home life of the city.
You see, West Indians were not accustomed to being provided with housing by the local authorities or by government in any sense. In any sense, this was quite a new thing to them. You provided your own shelter. This was a natural thing to do, and they more or less proceeded on this basis quite naturally. I mean, you didn't expect people to change so suddenly. And so they did whatever they could as their means and their situations afforded to provide themselves with shelter, and they became involved with the good and the bad elements in housing. But there was a shortage, and I don't think the West Indians coming to this country, no one could justify this claim by the press, you know, the popular press, that they were adding to this problem, because they didn't. They helped it. I worked in the building industry, and large numbers of my friends fellow West Indians did. We provided the houses.
Right up to the end of the 1950s, the way in which the existence of a race relations problem manifested itself was in relation to work rather than in relation to housing. It was commonplace at that time, if you walked down the street past factories, you would see notices up outside the factory gate saying, sorry, coloured quota full. There was, in other words, a fairly strong reaction from the native English workforce against this new group of workers who had come in. And although, as I've said, there was in reality a desperate shortage of labour, the trade unions were equally a victim of a myth which persisted for over a decade, and that was that the newcomers were coming in as cheap labour to undercut living standards.
Bill Strachan, in the centre, came from Jamaica during the war. He became an officer in the Royal Air Force and flew as a bomber pilot. Bill, who now works in a council office, sums up the feelings of West Indians who wish to settle in Britain.
People from the West Indies here have no enmity towards any British people, and in fact will be a strength to them and are extremely ambitious. I can assure trade unionists that there will be no problem with them undercutting trade unionists, and I can assure them that they will help in the cultural life in this country, and every attempt on their part is at social integration and being completely happy and cooperative with the British people.
White transport workers simply refused to work with blacks on the buses. And at the 1955 conference of the Transport Workers' Union, a series of resolutions were put up asking the union actually to ban blacks from working on the buses. But what is important in my view is not that there was this resentment, but that the situation was still fluid. It could still be influenced by positive and courageous leadership.
So what you want, Mr. Green, is to restrict the numbers of coloured people who come and get jobs in the transport department as drivers and conductors.
Well, that's what I'm instructed to do by my branch. It's got to be appreciated, of course, that the number of coloured people in Birmingham until recently was very small, and the citizens of Birmingham's knowledge of coloured people has come from newspapers and films and books, and unfortunately the poor coloured fella, he's only reported in a newspaper when he doesn't do what is right. They don't report him when he does the thing that he's expected to do, and in consequence there's a possibility that our people have got a somewhat biased opinion of the coloured man's habits and customs.
This is Mr. Davis, the goods agent in charge of Smithfield Depot. How many vacancies have you at the moment?
It's 9 vacancies for staff at the moment.
In what sort of jobs?
Principally in porters' jobs. We have 1 or 2 for capstanmen's posts.
Next day at Lambeth, I met 4 unemployed Jamaicans. They had been looking for work for weeks. They weren't skilled, but they could read and write, and as far as I could judge, they were intelligent and had good records. So I suggested that they should go to Smithfield to ask for the porters' jobs, which the manager had said were vacant. They went there on Thursday morning. They were turned down.
I went to the manager and asked for if he needed any porter. He told me that there was no vacancy for no porter. I asked him if he have any other space or job. He told me they have a job only to clear the rope from out the yard from 11 till 3.
Did you want to do that?
I decided to take the job. He said, not certain up till now, he had to go and look. He went into another room and come back and told me that there was no vacancy at all.
I went straight back to Mr. Davis for another interview. Now, Mr. Davis, you have vacancies here.
Oh, yes.
But now, 4 coloured men came this morning to ask for jobs and they were turned away. Why was that?
I see.
I put much the same questions to a leading member of the Railwaymen's Union at Smithfield, Mr. Geary. Now, why is it that there is a prejudice here against coloured men?
Oh, there's no prejudice, Mr. Chataway.
Why is it that they're not taken, then?
Well, it's the type of job done at a particular depot, you see. The speed is the question at the particular station, speed. And we feel that the colour man is apt to work at one particular space.
But now, not every coloured man, surely, is much slower than every Englishman. You can't judge a whole race like that.
No, I'm talking now on the majority of the particular type of colour man that I've contacted and that the staff at this particular depot have contacted.
If you wanted economic growth, you really had to have an increasing supply of manpower. And this was evident in the continent, where you had both a number of immigrants from agriculture into industry and also a number of foreign immigrants into the country. And if I remember the figures rightly, and I may be at fault in the figures, Germany was importing some 400,000 people a year. France was importing some 200,000 people a year. I think Belgium had about 25,000 people a year, and we were importing 50,000. So by comparison with Germany and France, we were importing few. And yet a tremendous song and dance was made.
It's nearly a year since the first coloured man was accepted for training on the corporation buses. Now there are about 300 of them. A Birmingham citizen said to me, they didn't half make a difference on the buses, these coloured chaps, wreathed in smiles and politeness even at 7 in the morning. It made a nice change, he said. Some of the coloured busmen's white mates at the Hockley garage certainly don't share that view, yet they must be familiar with it, because they assumed at once that special inquiry had come to Birmingham to glorify the coloured busman. So they barred us out.
There is no colour bar in the city. On the contrary, the coloured population appear to have been very well received, and testimony is constantly paid to the excellence of the work they are performing. But there is a housing problem in the city of great magnitude. Indeed, I believe the housing problem is the father and the mother of all our social problems in Birmingham.
The moral of the 1955 conference of the TNG was not that these resolutions were on the books, but that the executive committee of the TNG decided that instead of caving in, they would stand up to this kind of resentment. They did stand up, and the result of it was that they set a lead, and the protest virtually collapsed within the Union.
The basis of our movement is that we accept every man as a brother, irrespective of race or creed.
Here is the news. About 200 people, both whites and coloured, were involved in fighting and disturbances in the Notting Hill district of London late last night and early this morning. For the second night running, there were more disturbances last night between white and coloured people in the Notting Hill area of London. Extra police with dogs were sent to several streets where fighting broke out. 37 people were arrested, 21 of them white, including a woman, and 16 coloured.
I really think now it is a disgrace to see how we are being treated.
We can't go home. Our home is all surrounded by young teenagers who are hurling bottles and bricks all around Walmer Road. We can't go home. We have to locate one place anywhere we know the police will protect us. We can't leave to go to our home.
Myself and 4 fellas, and we was all stopped and searched by the police. If we had a knife in our pockets, we'd be gone to the jail. At the meantime, hundreds of people was on the pavement and nobody was searched. No, none of the natives was searched, but all the West Indians was searched.
It is important that the significance of these incidents should not be exaggerated at home or overseas. 1. The utmost strictness will be observed in the impartial enforcement of the law and in preventing the illegal carrying of weapons. 2. The government is reconsidering the implications of the free entry of Empire immigrants into this country.
Notting Hill certainly was an important event. It was an explosion, and it first registered in the public consciousness that there was something wrong, that there was a major problem that had arrived on the British political scene.
The trade union movement has been shocked, yes, and hurt by the news
of the race troubles in Nottingham and London. You see, they've realised that among the whites and coloureds who have clashed so violently, there must be many who, if they work at all, must of necessity carry a trade union card. And that gives them a sense of personal responsibility. And they've expressed that sense of personal responsibility by endorsing a condemnation of the vicious hooliganism, and that's their phrase, and a call for the full weight of the law to be applied to those inciting the disorders. We want no little rock in Britain, was how Sir Vincent Hewson put it.
The liberal conscience was not yet dead, and the best example of it is the summing up of the judge who dealt with the case of the 12 white youths who were convicted of affray in Notting Hill at the time, Mr. Justice Salmon. His judgment, his verdict, stands as the clarion call of the liberal conscience of the late 1950s.
You have filled the whole nation with horror, indignation, and disgust. Everyone, irrespective of the colour of their skin, is entitled to walk through our streets with their heads erect and free from fear. This is a right which these courts will always unfailingly uphold.
The events I've described in Notting Hill and Nottingham and elsewhere finally plunged what you might call the bulk of the politicians into the view that what had to be done about this problem was not to protect black people from racialist attacks, not to ensure equal treatment for them as equal citizens, but to control immigration as a solution to the problem. And the view was that if they weren't here, then obviously no one would be attacking them.
I'm living in Great Britain, a lovely city by name of London. The terror living in Great Britain, a lovely city by name of London. The people here are so accommodating, imagine the luxurious life that I'm living. And all the girls in the city adore the terror from La Trinity. I am going to stay here in Great Britain, yes, to better my position, and in case they should tell me go back to your life, I'm telling them no. Because Britain is the motherland.
This country had been the head of an empire. The head of an empire should not be excluding its own citizens. It should be leading the world in showing how a multiracial society could exist in a harmonious way.
In the debate in the House of Commons on the Commonwealth Immigrants Bill in 1961, the late Hugh Gaitskell spoke again for England when he said, "The immigrants are honest, hard-working, and at work. Why then do the government wish to keep them out? It is because they're coloured." I believe that is the verdict of history. But nonetheless, the fact is that immigration control from that day onwards became the standard solution to any mention of the colour problem or the race relations problem. And it was the first step that we took in this country towards the institutionalization of racialism.
I think I myself would say that there was no will to help, that an adverse prejudice ruled the roost, hence the absence of a policy. There was a vacuum as far as policy was concerned, and I think this vacuum is to be explained only in terms of prejudice, or fear of prejudice on the part of public opinion in general.
The Spanish ship Begona reached Southampton with several hours to spare. And for the 450 coloured immigrants she brought to Britain, anxiety was over. At midnight, the new Commonwealth Immigrants Act would come into force, with some controls applying to would-be settlers in this country. Hence the rush to arrive in Britain. In the last week, in addition to those coming by sea, about 2,000 flew in. Their new life had really begun. The large influx of coloured people from Commonwealth countries has created several problems, but Britain does not intend to call a halt. The government's attitude on the matter will remain liberal and humane, as it has been all along.
The Birmingham caucus arranged an opinion survey of certain marginal seats in Birmingham. I was never informed of the survey until after the event. I was never consulted about it. Had I been consulted, I would probably have opposed it, but I was never consulted. The survey showed that the issue uppermost in people's minds was the issue of colour, immigration. A lunch was convened for Conservative members and candidates. I was invited, so was Edward Boyle. Both of us, for quite different reasons, had other engagements, and we were unable to attend. Later, I was told by the leader of the Conservative Party in Birmingham that the meeting had decided to make colour the main issue of the 1964 election.
The coloured immigrant became a red-hot political issue. It won the Tories control of the council and finally the Smethwick seat in the general election, which they celebrated at this post-election bun fight. Triumphant Tories were accused by Labour of having cynically exploited racial prejudice among whites to swing the vote. Facts about this charged issue are hard to get. Smethwickians, sick of the holier-than-thou attitude of outside critics, are inclined to clam up. But I got the impression that if the local Tories did use the race issue, they did it negatively, by making soothing noises to any prospective voters who voiced racial grievances. Tory candidate Peter Griffiths derided Labour's Gordon Walker for trying to ignore the race issue, which he said was easy to do if you lived in Hampstead Garden suburb, but less easy if you lived in Smethwick.
I do believe that once the hysteria of the last few weeks has gone, we shall see that Smethwick was a beacon of hope at this last election, because it showed that even in these days when the party machines on both sides can claim to have control of the electorate, that a town like Smethwick made up its own mind, took no notice of the opinion polls and the surveys, made up its own mind on the issues, and chose regardless of gratuitous advice from outside.
I was so appalled that I made a speech to my own association, dissociating myself from the line being taken by my Conservative colleagues in Birmingham.
It is a fact that we want to see our streets safe at night. We want to see houses that are clean, houses that are not overcrowded. All these things are related to the immigrant problem, though they're not directly the result of immigration alone.
Well, if I may say something which may sound old-fashioned, I think the Conservative Party was then a more aristocratic party than it has since become. The thought of putting a stop to immigration would have appeared to them, as it appeared to me, inhumane, not human, unfeeling. This did not apply to my Birmingham colleagues. I judged they were drawn from the locality, in the main, if not almost entirely. Yes, entirely. I thought them parochial, narrow, inhumane, and although I'm no longer a member of the Conservative Party, what has amazed me is the rapidity with which they've been able to reproduce themselves in the parliamentary party. I regret it.
There was a fundamental contradiction that you could not have the government, as the government, saying we will have discriminatory immigration controls, and at the same time to turn around and say to an estate agent, sorry chaps, you've got to treat blacks and whites alike without distinction, and if you don't, the full weight of the law is going to come down on you. This just lacked credibility, and that has been the major problem of the Race Relations Act ever since.
This is the Labour Party's wake for Patrick Gordon Walker. Ironically, the binge had to be held in a pub because the Labour Club, of which Mr. Gordon Walker is a member, is too colour conscious to ask any of the Labour Party's well-wishers from the other side of the colour curtain.
Undoubtedly, it has a great deal to do with the legacy of empire itself. Because remember the fundamental fact about the relationship between black and white in the imperial experience was a relationship of inequality. It was a relationship between superiors and inferiors. Because after all, the civilizing mission of Britain was the cornerstone of empire. And so it would be surprising if that assumption of the inferiority of blacks didn't spill over into the thinking of politicians and policymakers when they came to consider the problems of racial relations as they emerged.
I thought very carefully about what I had to say when I knew the result of the poll, and I think I should leave it there. There is one thing I resent, this new attempt to paint me as an aloof person who never came amongst you, never came to Smethwick, knew nothing about Smethwick. I think really this party this evening is a sufficient answer to that.
When they were confronted with the race relations problem, they were virtually defenseless against any threat of a popular revolt against black people in this country. Because they themselves, in their heart of hearts, shared the view that somehow they were inferior, somehow they ought not to be here.
I haven't lost faith in the British character. I mean, I wouldn't be in this country living as a normal person if I did. I didn't have to. I chose Britain to live in it because I like it and I like its people. And I think I'm one of them. I consider myself one of them, although not having been born in this country. And all the things I've seen, and I do see things, no doubt about it. But I still have that faith, and that more or less consoles me.
London is the place for me. London, this lovely city. You can go to France or America, India, Asia or Australia, but you must come back to London City.